Hey everyone, how you doing? Welcome to Econ. I'm David Angelo, a comedian, and I'm with Bob Murphy, an economist. And this is a new podcast where we take the biggest stories in economics every episode and we kind of explain why everyone's wrong. And we do it in an approachable way that I think will make everyone angry. And that's really what we do best. And Bob is, of course, an expert in economics. I can barely even say the word. So it's important that he's here to make sure that everything is by the book, textbook, and we have to have our theories right, because that's the thing. A lot of people are on the internet and they talk about economics, they talk about finance, and they're so it's like you could poke holes in it just through deductive reasoning. Don't you feel that way? Like sometimes there's just not really, I don't know what you could possibly, what do you listen to when you want to learn about economics? It must be very difficult for you. You're kind of at the end of the road, right?
Well, yeah, part of the issue for professional economists is, as you are saying, much of the public discourse is like they haven't caught up to the stuff we teach at the undergrad level. And
Right.
so it's difficult to know. So economists arguing with each other, talking about real high level things. And then, but yeah, like today's topic of rent control, this is something that's pretty standard. And yet, the average discourse, it's as if the economists have had nothing to say about this for decades.
The economists have, well, they might have something to say, but they are doing it at a very high level. No one understands what they're talking about. They're doing graphs and things. And then at the low level, the journalism level, those people know nothing. I mean, they're like pulling these people off of the Kardashian beat to then do the macroeconomic segment. And everything they do is wrong. And I know that it's wrong. And I'm, again, like I've said, not even an expert. That's how bad it is. So today's episode, we're going to talk about housing. I live in New York City. Housing is, of course, a disaster. There's a new mayor, Mamdani, who is a communist. I think it's just he's proud of it now. Finally, I think they're proud of saying that now. They used to be it was like a thing you couldn't admit. Like you can never admit you're rich, you can never admit you're asleep, and you can never admit you're a communist. And I think he's changed that a little bit, so he's embraced it. But they're doing rent control, which is, are they? At least they're not having. Is it rent control? Would you call it that? They're not allowing increases in rent for the rent stabilized apartments in New York, which I think is 1 million units or something like that.
Yeah, yes, it's rent control. Broadly speaking, anytime the government comes in and sets down regulations for what you can do with your rent as a landlord, that's rent control. But yeah, the specific thing is a rent freeze. And you're right, it's about 1 million apartments in New York City. It's about 40% of the total, is my understanding of the stock of rental units in New York. That it's 1 and 2 year leases that are being signed now going forward for like 2 years. That you're not allowed to raise the rent on those things.
Right. Now, look, there's a standard response to this about price controls causing shortages and all that. And we're going to get into that. You're going to give it to us because we need to know. People need to learn stuff. I'm tired of people not knowing things. And we're going to know that. But I'm going to argue devil's advocate on it because I'm not a communist, but I also hate the landlords. I have a real problem with a lot of this stuff. So I know that I'm getting screwed either way. So we're going to solve this. We're not going to just talk about it. We're going to solve what's going on with housing and try to figure out some solution here, because the fact is a studio apartment in Manhattan is like $3,500 a month for 300 square feet, right? And on the one hand, you can say that's too expensive for people, but it's at that price because they're paying it. That's the part of wrap your head around that for me a little bit. It's too expensive, but at the same time, everyone is renting them at these prices.
Well, right. I think the man on the street logic is that, well, it's a necessity, just like, if food got really expensive, people would have to pay it. And, that's sort of the issue. But I think your point is valid that the fundamental problem here is there's a lot of people who want to live in places like New York or San Francisco or Chicago. And it's the market price that kind of regulates that and, sends a signal to say, whoa, there's too many people here right now. That, there's better jobs.
And there are too many people here.
So, I guess that's the big picture. Just kind of put that out there for people to understand, how do economists tend to look at this is that, yeah, for various reasons, living in Manhattan is a lot cooler than living, 2 hours away, especially if you work in the city. And so, yeah, who wouldn't want to just live on Broadway or something? But the price is what rations that everybody can't live there. And the price is kind of what rations that. And the government coming in and just saying, no, it's illegal. you're not changing that fundamental imbalance that more people want to live there than the real estate can support. And so now that just spills over into other areas that try to regulate who's living there.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is like, here, I'm going to go back on it. I'm going to make the anti-communist case because I think, housing, you may have a need for it, but you don't have a need for Manhattan housing.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, this is not it's like you need food. You don't need caviar, right? I mean, you don't need to have the best. And so the fact that people are paying it shows that they have the money. I mean, you can't get out of control prices unless people have more disposable income than.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is an analogy, Dave, for like the basic point you're trying to get at here is when people talk about, they're not being paid a living wage. And it's like, well, if they haven't been paid a living wage, how come they're not dead? So there's just that sense that some of this language is a bit misleading and, for rhetorical purpose, fair enough. But yeah, when we're trying to really understand an issue, to just say something like people can't afford this kind of rent, but they are, right? So.
Right. Well, then the other question is, I'm going to take now the socialist kind of view of it. The rents are divorced from, I mean, you hear about people talking about, well, if you have rent control, the apartments are all going to be dilapidated. I don't really follow that because the rent right now is divorced from the upkeep cost, right? I mean, it doesn't cost, if I have an apartment building in Manhattan and it's $3,500 a month for a studio apartment, 300 square feet, and 10 miles away in New Jersey, the same building, it rents for $800 a month. I mean, everything over 800 is just a demand, a function of demand, right? I mean, it's not like a hard cost of maintenance or anything.
I see the point you're making. I think part of it might be property taxes could be, part of an issue there. I'm not sure if they adjust that based on the status of the unit. But I mean, I can just give you anecdotal evidence that, my buddy was in the Upper East Side and was living in, it was a funny story. His cousin had the rent control apartment, got married, so he had to move out because it was total bachelor pad. But if you move out, then you lose the benefit. And so he had my friend move in, who was his cousin, and had to keep getting his mail delivered there because otherwise, the post office might get tipped off that the guy moved out. So, I mean, there's lots of stuff like that. And yeah, when you go in there and the guy, I don't remember off the top of my head, how much he was paying per month. Oh yeah, it was a steal. But yeah, the building, like there was no, they weren't painting it. Like the lights were all, off in the stairwells and things are flickering, stuff like that. There's no reason for them to maintain it. So I do see your point, but on the other hand, I think there are just general costs. And regardless of that, even if you think, the landlords could afford it and they just choose not to, still, if they have a long line of people who are willing to move in, regardless of how crappy the building is, what incentive do they have to upkeep it, right? So, I mean, I think there are genuine costs, like you're saying, that would be overlooked. But even if on your own terms that was the case, still, you're taking away the incentive. And so it's not surprising then that the landlords aren't doing everything they can to make the building more attractive because they don't need to. If you don't like it, get out. There's a long line of people who'd love this place for that price.
Right. Well, I guess I'm putting my communist. I'm wearing my red. I'm a communist today, just so you understand. The idea then is that the reason that I'm looking at that slice of the rent that's based on demand only, and I'm saying because I know that building rents for $800 a month nearby, that the $2,200 a month or whatever it is extra is demand related, and the demand comes from the municipality. So as a communist, I'm going to say to you, well, because this apartment is in Manhattan, the landlord is benefiting from the demand generated through the civic environment here. Therefore, ergo, he should be foregoing some of that profit, which is beyond the cost of maintenance and upkeep, and being able to give that back to the community. How is that wrong?
Okay, so I'll tell you what, as an economist, I think the answer is, I don't think it would, convince Karl Marx or his acolytes, but I think besides, again, I was trying to give you one example of, the property tax, I think is probably one in terms of explicit, I got to write a check in terms of the cost. But beyond that, just the underlying, the property value itself, right? So that, the same physical building, I could have, a 3-bedroom house somewhere in, Boise, And then the same
Right.
thing if it were going to be just outside off of Central Park. It's it's the same thing to build the place or whatever. Why should the one? It's just to buy the land. Okay, so coming back to your example,
Okay.
if you're an outside investor and so just don't think of it as someone who's historically owned the property for six
Right.
decades, but a new investor coming in, how much are they going to have to outlay to get the one building in Manhattan versus
Right.
Queens or something? It's a bigger number, and so then when they calculate, okay, and then with the rent we get, what's the rate of return on my investment? It's going to be a lot lower in Manhattan if they can't charge more. So there's that element. So in terms of an outside investor running the numbers, the rate of return they're going to get on their investment is lower in the place with higher real estate prices. And so how are they going to make that work? Well, they're going to cut corners elsewhere. Whereas in the place with a lower real estate price per acre, the rate of return's higher. So to be competitive, they're going to have to offer for we're going to paint the building, and there's the elevator's always working. Your water heater goes out on Sunday morning. We'll get over there and fix it. So that's I think the main thing that you're missing is the rate of return on the underlying investment.
Well, yeah, that defeats that argument. If you just buy the building, because you have now your rent, the cost of upkeep is only a part of it. The other is the cost of the purchase of the real estate itself. And whereas a few miles out, it'd be much cheaper. Here, they're paying for that advantage of the civic location through the cost of the purchasing. But I mean, what if they've had it for 100 years? I mean, in that case, I guess you could say, well, they're the people who've been contributing to the environment, so maybe they shouldn't have that. I don't know. I mean, there's different ways to look at it. I just know that people are. It's interesting because in Brooklyn, there are people who, a lot of people are very wealthy, or they're the children of wealthy people, but then they are like acting like that. Like in Mamdani is an example of this, right? I mean, are his parents not millionaires, and then he's living in a rent stabilized apartment? And then you're sort of like, well, who is that? You're just taking the money from the landlord at that point. But it's not from need necessarily. If you're here and you don't earn the requisite amount of money to pay the market rate, this is a choice. Is it not?
Right. And I think you're putting your finger on something really important there. And just to pull on that a little bit.
Thank God, because I didn't know. I was just rambling, honestly.
So, let's say that, the public, like, geez, these prices are too expensive. And there's some people that's just really out of reach for them. And so a much more sensible targeted approach would be to say, okay, we can come up with subsidies for qualified recipients, because you're right. Right now, when we say 40% roughly of the units in New York City are rent stabilized to some degree, I don't think it's the case that if you looked at all the 40% of those, that's like, the lowest income earners. That right now, It's hard to get, and that's one of the pernicious effects of rent control, is that the landlords use other criteria to determine who we're going to rent to besides just what will the market bear. And so it's things like, well, who do you know? Like, when I was going to NYU, I got one of those, things, you new to the city, and, was talking about how do you find an apartment, and it was saying stuff like, try to join a church, or try to, go get a broker, and then you can, if you're willing to pay 3 months fee, and blah, blah, blah. So, like, what is going to church? I mean, I think you should go to church, but that shouldn't have anything to do with getting an apartment. The point was, because then maybe you can meet people who know the right person, and And so I'm saying, like, if you're some immigrant off the boat and you don't speak the language and you don't have any savings, you're the last person that's going to get into the rent stabilized apartment. So if it were like with food, to say, hey, people need to eat, and so why don't we just pass a law saying grocery stores can't charge more than such and such for oranges? That's a very blunt approach, as opposed to just giving food stamps to people who need more money to buy food. So that's what I'm saying, that even if you want the government to do something, to just mandate and say, hey, the rent in the city can't go above a certain amount, that's not guaranteeing that, like I said, my buddy was middle class. He had a good job, and the reason he was in that rent control place was because he knew his cousin. It wasn't because my friend was the person who deserved it the most and was some cab driver making ends meet and supporting 5 kids. That wasn't what was going on there.
Right. Well, there's a lot of that where it's like people who are even doing means testing on income or something. It's like, okay, you're 23 years old, you make $30,000 a year, but your parents are anesthesiologists or something. It's like you still, I still don't believe that they should be in a subsidized situation, but that's a lot of what's going on. And the idea, I suppose, is if there's no government intervention, then the prices will get out of control and people will have to leave. Is this, though, is that not like a is there some free market solution to runaway prices other than building new apartments, which isn't going to happen?
Well, I mean, if you're going to take that away, then sure. That's the obvious one, right? In general,
Right.
if prices are rising, that's a signal that, hey, there's excess demand for something here, build more of it. And so, right, I do think that part
But
of
you're at like a physical limit in a way, right, in the city a little bit. Or is it, what's the reason that they aren't just putting up 300 floor studio apartment?
Oh, I mean, there's lots
Howard.
of zoning regulations just all over the place in terms of, how high can you build and things like that. And
Right.
so, and again, with all this stuff, it's not that I'm here saying this is what the right policy should be. I'm just explaining what the trade-offs are. And
No, we need the right policy.
so, yeah, I mean, it's like in places like Houston, for example, where they famously don't have very much zoning regulation. There's mid-rise, high-rise apartments going up all over the place, and that's why, compared to other cities of comparable density, the price of getting an apartment in Houston is a lot lower than in other comparable cities. And so, there's nothing magic about that. That, yeah, if the government says you're not allowed to build more units, or they regulate how many units can be built, then the supply is lower and the price tends to be higher.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess the solution, Mamdani goes off about private landlords as slumlords, but the worst landlord in New York City is NYCHA, which is the public housing owned by the city. I mean, those are the worst units by far, where the elevators don't work, nothing's, the city owns those. They're the biggest slumlord. And so when there's intervention like that, I do think it always kind of like, there's something motivates it where the people are like, what's going on here? This is crazy. This seems artificial, what's happening. And maybe it is also partially, there's this working paper from the, I don't know if you saw this working paper. I don't even know what that means. The Federal Reserve put out about immigration causing the 30% of growth in home prices and 20% in rent. And I mean, isn't it just a natural thing of like immigration or migration, even internal, whether it's international or just people moving from Ohio, where it's like, if they're going to keep doing that, that's going to drive the prices up in all cases, right? I mean, isn't it just people moving into the city?
Well, sure. And again, it's that balance that, again, other things equal, a lot of people would want to move to New York for various reasons, go see a Broadway show or whatever, or, it's better paying jobs, the restaurants are better, things like that. So there has to be some mechanism, if it's not going to be the government just telling everyone this is where you need to live, right? If those decisions are decentralized in a sense, there's got to be some way that there's a feedback loop and people get some sense of, oh, wait, if I move in to Manhattan, that makes it more crowded for everyone else there. And so in a market economy, right, how do you get that feedback? It's, well, the rent is higher. And so, I mean, that's a natural mechanism.
The other part of it is the housing in general. Like if we look at the housing market, and now I'm talking houses in the suburbs, for instance, or in the city too. I mean, it's the same thing. We had this period of like 4 or 5 years, was it, where the interest rates were zero. Everyone got a 2.5% mortgage. You're locked in. That's a fixed rate for 30 years. That is, to me, it's like price controls on the housing. Those people got a government, to my mind, I mean, am I wrong? Are they not getting government subsidized housing? Anyone who has a 30-year, totally artificially low, you're getting a 2.5% mortgage in a time when there was 9% inflation. Is that not a government subsidized housing that they're in? I know if it's not necessarily rent control or like price control in the strict sense, but they seem to have an artificially low cost in the same way maybe someone renting a rent control apartment for the last 30 years would have an artificially low cost. Is that wrong?
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree with you entirely. I mean, with the recent passing of Alan Greenspan, I've been doing a lot of stuff in terms of did the Federal Reserve contribute to the housing bubble and all that stuff. So, right. Yeah, I think the housing bubble, like you're talking about, like those really ridiculous low mortgage rates, Yeah, I don't think that was, quote, the free market in action. That was the Federal Reserve and a cartel of banks pumping in artificially cheap credit and, yeah, in a sense, giving a gift to the people who took advantage of that and bought houses. So, yeah,
Right.
I definitely think there's all kinds of, and then even there, too, like just the insult to injury when everything blew up in 2008 and people were clamoring, to get some help when they're underwater on their mortgages. Oh no, that would be socialism. But then, the
Right.
Fed comes in and buys all the mortgage-backed securities. We got to keep credit flowing through Wall Street. So yes, the system is currently rigged, and it doesn't shock me that Mamdani got elected. And I understand that, geez, it just seems like it's hard to make ends meet nowadays. But I'm saying the fault is not because landlords are allowed to charge the market price. I think it's all these other interventions that are causing this problem.
Well, what if the landlord has the building because they got 2.5% mortgage, which is a non-market rate? I mean, to me, I'm just feeling like I know I'm getting screwed on everything, right? I'm totally screwed every which way I go, whether I'm trying to rent, whether I'm trying to buy a house. I've got totally screwed. So there are people who then got a government benefit. In this case, they're landlords. Also, it's the people who bought houses who are ordinary people who, by the way, in New York, it's like everyone's a liberal, everyone's a liberal. As soon as they have a house they want to sell, they become the most ruthless capitalist you've ever seen in your life. They are these people. They would sell they have a little 1,300 square foot house. They would sell it to Jeffrey Epstein before they would give it. Just if I offered $1,000 less, they would go to him. They're totally ruthless when it comes to their own property. But they have those houses at a subsidized rate, non-market price, which then, I mean, you see the effects of it. It's the same as when you have what you say will happen to a rent control market, where it's like you have a lower supply and much higher cost in the market, available apartments, right? That's what's happened in the housing market. So if you have these conditions that already exist, you've already tilted the scales to the landlords and people who are homeowners. Where is the remediation? You can't just say to the people, and I'm so against it. I mean, I would just be, nothing would please me more than total economic collapse right now, right? Like if everyone would lose everything, let's do a hard reset. But I don't understand how you can have that kind of thing, that dynamic on the one side, which is it is, like you say, the wealthier side of the ledger, right? I mean, that's the top quintile, the homeowners in Westchester and Connecticut, and then the people who are landlords in New York benefiting enormously from this, and then the people just being told, well, you must be subjected to market forces when it doesn't apply to anyone else. I mean, how can you rectify that? What is the solution? I mean, you don't want to say Mamdani, because you keep going down the road, you create more problems. You can't just solve the issue. It's like trying to put the fire out on your head with a hammer kind of thing. You can't just keep adding these non-market solutions that will distort things even more. But how do you unwind this thing that already happened? Because they're in 30-year mortgages. I mean, they're in it for 30 years. They have their rent control. You talk Mamdani 2-year price freeze. They're in 30 years. How do you justify that?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think there's two separate things going on. So if I were just talking about, like, oh, it's, natural rights and libertarian law or something, and hey, if you own a building, you can charge whatever you want, and if you want to, insist somebody hops on one foot when he walks up the stairs, you got to do that. That's fine. It's all contracts for the win. That would be one thing. And then if that were the main argument I was making, then you're right to point out and say, well, let's actually look at a case-by-case basis here. How many of these landlords do you actually think, according to John Locke's principles, are the rightful owners versus, government kickbacks and whatever? That would be a good, a valid response. But I'm saying, regardless of how we got to this position, things like just freezing rent is not going to help, the people that it's ostensibly designed to benefit. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. That
right.
Just from a utilitarian.
It helps the children of the people who have the houses in Westchester. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like it always does seem unfair, all the intervention, but it never gets unwound. And there's no way. Can you imagine a way to unwind the 2.5% 30-year mortgage that everyone's in? They'll never leave. They'll never sell, and they're paying nothing. And if I want to go buy the house, it's like 7%, and I'm paying twice the the list price of what they bought it for 5 years ago. I mean, how can you fix that? And I don't understand where everyone got their money. That's the other thing. We have to do a total separate podcast on this. Where is everyone getting the list price? The average list price in Westchester is like $1.5 million. So all I hear all the time is sob stories. We don't have any money. We can't afford it. And it's like every time I try to buy I'm talking normal little houses, 3-bedroom, 1,500, 1,600 square feet. It's $1.5 million. You're approaching $1,000 a square foot in the suburbs right now. I don't know who these people are. I don't get it. It's rigged. I don't know what we can do.
Yeah, I remember growing up. I think I'm probably a little older than you, but like growing up in the '80s, and like if you heard a house was more than $1 million, that meant it's a mansion, and you're a rich person. And now it's like depending on where you live. No, if you have if you got 2-income household, your house is over $1 million. That's how it is.
And they have the mansion tax. So any house over $1 million, you pay. I can't remember what it is, 1% or something to the state on the sale of the house. They call it a mansion tax. So whenever you talk about taxes, talk about creep on the bracket. I mean, $1 million is nothing. And you have to pay this mansion tax on top of it. All right. But anyway, how do we solve it? What do we do? We can't get out of the 30-year thing. We're not going to build. We're not going to suddenly build. They brought, 10 million new people in the last 5 years. You're not going to build this volume of housing. What's going on? What can we possibly do?
Okay, well, let me just real quick make a plug for the standard economist analysis here. I'll just outsource it. At GMU, they have a good article that came out. It's called The Ceiling Trap. If people want to just Google that for George Mason University. The Ceiling Trap. And it just lays through, I'll just give a quick, some of the highlights. Like there's a famous example. In 1906, there was an earthquake and it led to fires in San Francisco that wiped out like half of the housing stock. Right, like 225,000 people were homeless. They all had to, basically move in with everybody else for a bit while things got rebuilt. And if you go back and look at the newspaper ads of the time, there was no crisis, or it wasn't like a bunch of classifieds of people needing rooms to rent. In fact, there was more advertisements for available room than not. It's because they didn't have rent control then. Just the prices went up a lot, but then people moved in and they got sorted that way, and then housing was rebuilt. In contrast, in 1946, after World War II, there was migration patterns and a lot of people, GIs returning, and a lot of people were going to San Francisco. And the governor of California declared a housing emergency in San Francisco, even though, it was like a 10% influx of people compared to, the disaster in 1906. So I'm saying, so what changed? It was clearly a worse problem in 1906 than in 1946, but because there was rent control in place from the war, that was a vestige of the war. So just, again, showing that what we think of as a housing shortage and crisis is largely a policy decision. Just give another example. In Stockholm, they have rigid rent control laws, and the government has like official queues that you can get in, like if you need a new place. And right now, for the country as a whole, it's like, or a city as a whole, it's a 9-year wait to get into an apartment. And if like more esoteric, desired properties, it's like a 23-year wait. So my point is just saying, let's just pass a law, and you're not allowed to charge more. That doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is that right now more people want to live in this area than there are rooms to go around. That just displaces it. Other places, last one I'll say here, David, is in Oslo, they had extensive rent control, and they abolished it in 1982. So this one economist went and he looked at all the newspaper ads for, apartments from 1970 to like 2008, I think, to see, because there was that sharp break in 1982 when they just liberalized rents. And before then, the tenants would advertise, or the landlords too, would say things like, if you live here, you got to be willing to cut the lawn, you got to babysit. Like they were saying all the things the tenants would have to do to be eligible to rent this place. And like the deposits got to be really big in terms of once you moved in, you got to put down like, 3, 4, 6 months rent. Whereas after they got rid of that thing, it was just, this is the price, right? So the standard point that economists make in textbooks on this stuff is, there's still rationing going on. If you don't let them raise the price, they'll do other things like, well, what kind of person do we want living here? And like, this is someone that I know from church or whatever. So again, you're really not targeting it to the neediest people, the ones the most disadvantaged, if that's what you think you're doing. So as far as, go ahead.
They have the thing now where I can't even do the math. I'm going to look on a calculator, but you have to have like 40 times the monthly rent in income. So it's like, is it 4? No, it's 80. So if you have to have a $3,500 $3,500 a month studio apartment, you have to make 80 times 3,500 a month. You have to make 280,000 a year for them to approve that, which is like a huge amount of money, isn't it?
So that's, again, my point is they have to, because what's happening fundamentally is if they're not allowed to charge that much on the front end, then they really, they don't have that much of a margin. Like we were talking about, at the start of this episode, in terms of like, their outlay to get the building or whatever. Even if they bought it years ago, they could still sell the property, right? So there's still there's the opportunity, because like I could sell this building, get a boatload of money, and go put it, in some stock somewhere, do something else, real estate in Florida. And so again, it's the opportunity cost. So if the margin they're getting per person is low from the rent per se, they really want to make sure we don't want to let someone in here who's going to, get behind on the rent or whatever. So that's why they do these other methods of screening to make sure it's, quote, the right kind of person. So again, you're not solving the problem. And you're right. There's other things going on, and the unfortunate logic is government interventions cause problems, and then people are understandably upset. And then somebody like Mamdani comes along and says, "Oh, that's free market capitalism for you. Elect me and I'll do it." And then this isn't going to work, and people are going to be upset. These buildings will be dilapidated because the landlord have no reason to upkeep them if they can't raise the rent. Their costs are going up. They're getting squeezed, right? It's not like the costs of running the building are going down. They're going up too. So, and the tenants are going to be unhappy about that, and they're going to go to Mamdani and say, "These jerk landlords, my water heater goes out and they don't even fix it."
Right. Well, I mean, there is like the analogy of the grocery store thing where New York City refused to allow Walmart into New York City. Mm-hmm. So everyone's paying $9 for a jar of peanut butter because you have to go to these little stupid corner stores, and they act like it's mom and pop small business. They're all reselling Kraft and Coca-Cola like it's like artisanal, Cheetos. So the entire unaffordability of groceries in New York City is based on this refusal to allow Walmart to operate. If you go to Trader Joe's, which is they do allow, it looks like a Soviet bread line around the block because people are like, this is the only place where groceries are just normal prices. So then he comes in and he says, well, we're going to have city-owned grocery stores. And it's like, you don't need to do that. You can just have Walmart come in. Walmart's already the cheapest. You're putting problems on top of problems. So that part I understand, and I find it like excruciatingly annoying. This thing with the housing, though, people are locked in. It's not the liquidity of like any other commodity, because it's like they're sitting in there and they got 30 years. We have to wait for them to die before we could get this housing stock back on the market, because they're not going to leave. They got 2.5% mortgage, and somehow, and then Trump is like, you talk about Mamdani as a communist. Trump is going out there like, we need to keep the prices high on the houses. And it's like, oh, thank you, Donald. I appreciate that, someone's looking out for, again, it's like the whole thing is stacked against, if I just needed 5 years earlier to buy a house, and I would have been on the other side of this talking about how all these communists need to be eradicated. But as it stands, I'm still a renter, and therefore I am on the fence about what kind of despotism I want ushered in to solve all these problems.
Right. Just to go back before I forget, earlier how you were saying in your experience, you're mad at the commies, but you're also mad at the landlords, and I get that. But again, even there, in terms of standard textbook exposition, that's exactly what you would expect to see. That what kind of person, like if a restaurant isn't allowed to charge enough, to cover the cost of their meal or whatever, you'd have to have a real hard ass in there. And when people finish their meal, like, get them out of there, because we got to bust the table and get the next people in, like if the margin's artificially really low. So he said, geez, the people running that restaurant are really mean to the customers, but it's pretty affordable. So I'm just saying that's the logic, that's the kind of person that can make it work to run a rent controlled apartment is a different kind of person than someone who's, than the maitre d' at a hotel that's allowed to charge the market rate.
Again, I agree with you, because I was a tenant in a building, and I had this huge argument with them during COVID because they wanted to renew my lease. It's like May 31st, and they're like, you have to re-sign May 31st, 2020, and they're like, you have to re-sign your lease for another year. And I'm like, the city's in martial law for crying out loud. Like, can I just go month to month? And they're like, no. And so I kept sending them a rent check, and they kept sending it back, and then they ended up trying to evict me over this thing of the holdover, they call it. And it put it in the perspective. It's like there are no nice landlords in New York, mostly because of I think it's like it's a a synergy here of you have atrocious tenants,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the only people who survive in the Darwinian kind of view of it are the most ruthless, terrible people who are, because if you're nice as a landlord, you're going to get taken advantage of. So
Yeah, just a quick one on that. I was in, it was actually Houston, even though, so kind of undercuts the rent control element. But yeah,
Right.
I was in a new building where they had given like teaser, like I moved in while they were still doing construction. I actually thought it was cool because I got to watch a building get built like right out my window. So I thought it was kind of
Yeah.
neat. Like they had a
I
sister
hated
building,
that.
but in
Yeah.
general, there are people that, you know, construction noise or whatever. And so they were like giving 6-month bonuses. And so I was traveling, I was teaching at Texas Tech, and I was like a day late one time coming back. And there was a big sign on my door saying, you know, you're late with your thing. If you don't get us, like, this is embarrassing because it makes it look like, you know, to the people on your hall that you're a deadbeat or something.
Oh, yeah,
So I
they should
complained to
see
the
my
lady. I
face.
was like, I was one day late. But she explained to me, she said, well, yeah, sorry, but like a bunch of other people had stayed the full 6 months, not paid a dime, and then had to be all evicted. You know, like that was their plan the whole time. So yeah, they were going to be real hard asses, and because they were just getting taken advantage of. So yes, because there are a lot of people doing, and yeah, and it's like an arms race, and then just hostilities, and people had bad experience with landlords, so they just trash the place if they're getting evicted, and then the landlords take that into account, and that's why they screen on the front end. So yeah, it's not a good situation.
It's not a good. We can end on that. It's not a good situation. We didn't solve it the way I was hoping we would, but we kind of at least have an understanding of all of the things that are in play. I think we hit a lot of all the dynamics, both from the tenant side, the advocacy of how dare you. I mean, I'm like, okay, I've had it with New York. Let me move to the suburbs. Oh no, wait, I can't do that anymore. That entire market is all skewed. So we have that, and then we've seen then just the economic forces that are at play when you put in a price control of any kind. In this case, on housing. So I think that's a pretty good episode to start us off on Econ episode 1, and we're going to do these on the hot button issues because these are the things everyone wants to know about. These are the things in the news, but no one really. You don't get both sides like we just did there. You know, so I think this is going to be. I think this is going to be it. I think we're going to shape policy moving forward. A lot of people are going to be watching. Sponsors, pay attention. And Bob, you got any closing words? You anything you want to plug? You have a lot of podcasts you also put up.
Yeah, if you like this kind of stuff, you want the more deep dive on economics. I'm the host of what's called the Human Action Podcast, and on Twitter I'm at Bob Murphy Econ. Just some fun stuff there.
Fun stuff, and he's my go-to guy for economics because a lot of other people they have ideology about like these different things. Sometimes it's like just tell me the correct the sterile economic laws at play. That's all I need, and that's when I go to Bob Murphy. And now you get him here, and we'll do more of these. And thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks. And when I want some like real chipper analysis and just to make me feel good about the day, I go to David Angelo.
Wow, that's how bad it is for him. I mean, geez, but I appreciate it. Yeah. All right. See you later.